My daughter said I was too old, too slow, and too much of a burden. So she put me in a nursing home without my consent and moved her family into my house like I was already dead. But I wasn't confused. I wasn't finished. And while she thought I'd fade away quietly in some forgotten corner, I was planning something else. Something she'd feel every time she opened her front door, every time she looked out her kitchen window, every single day for the rest of her miserable life. This is how I made her regret the day she ever underestimated her old man. I'm Frank Mayfield, 73 years old, and I've been nobody's fool for 7 decades. I raised my daughter Jessica with calloused hands and a heart that never stopped fighting. She was all I had after my Margaret passed from cancer 12 years ago. I worked 2 jobs to keep her in college. I walked her down the aisle when that smooth-talking Mark convinced her to marry him. I babysat my grandson Tommy every weekend so they could have their couple time. And I never once asked for thanks because I thought love would come back around when it mattered most. I was wrong. When I collapsed in my garage that Tuesday morning in March, I didn't think much of it. Probably just overexertion. I'd been trying to fix Jessica's car transmission because Mark was too busy and she couldn't afford a mechanic. The concrete was cold against my cheek, and my left arm felt like someone had poured molten lead through my veins, but I figured it was just old age catching up. Jessica rushed over that evening with Mark and 16-year-old Tommy in tow, all acting concerned. "Dad, we've been talking," Jessica said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. "We just want what's best for you." Mark nodded like a bobblehead, his beady eyes already calculating something behind his plastic smile. "They offered to help me settle my affairs." That was the exact phrase Jessica used, like I was already halfway in the ground. "They brought over casseroles I didn't ask for, started going through my paperwork without permission, and kept dropping hints about how hard it must be to keep up a house at your age. I didn't know that behind my back, they'd already spoken to a lawyer. I didn't know they were whispering to my neighbors that I was slipping mentally. I didn't know Mark had already made copies of my house keys. Most importantly, I didn't know that Jessica had been forging my signature on documents for months, positioning herself to take everything I'd worked my entire life to build. A week after my dizzy spell, they invited me out to lunch. "Just the 3 of us," Jessica said with that smile that never reached her eyes. "You need a break, Dad. We're going to spoil you today." Something felt off, but this was my daughter. My little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. Surely she wouldn't. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't bring my medications. I didn't even wear my good shoes because they said we'd just be gone a few hours. They drove me 45 minutes outside of town to a place called Sunset Manor, a bland brick building with beige walls and plastic flowers wilting in the hallway. The smell hit me first, industrial disinfectant trying to mask something deeper, sadder. "Just for a few days," Jessica said, her voice shakier now. "You need rest, Dad. The doctor said so. The nurses here are wonderful." I'd never spoken to any doctor about needing rest. Mark helped me out of the car with hands that felt too eager, too rehearsed. Jessica hugged me tight like she meant it, and for a moment I almost believed this was temporary. That my daughter really did love me enough to make sure I was okay. Then they walked through those sliding doors and never looked back. The room they put me in was smaller than my garage. Bare white walls, a single dresser that wasn't mine, and a hospital bed I'd never seen before. When I asked the nurse for a phone to call Jessica, she gave me a sympathetic look that made my blood run cold. "You'll have to wait until visiting hours, Mr. Mayfield." But my daughter just left. There must be some mistake. The nurse, a kind-faced woman named Carol, showed me a clipboard thick with forms. My name was typed at the top, but the signature at the bottom looked wrong. The F in Frank was too curvy, the M in Mayfield too sharp. Someone had been practicing. Medical consent, checked. Residential admission, checked. Long-term care observation, checked. Financial responsibility transfer, checked. They'd committed me. My own daughter had committed me like I was some senile old fool who couldn't wipe his own ass. I sat on the edge of that unfamiliar mattress with my hands folded like I was in church, staring at linoleum floors that had seen too many broken dreams. My chest felt tight, not from my heart this time, but from something deeper. The crushing weight of betrayal by the one person who was supposed to love me unconditionally. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't give them the satisfaction of the confused old man routine they'd written for me. Instead, I started planning. The next morning, I asked to speak with the administrator. Mrs. Patterson was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who looked like she'd heard every sob story in the book. I told her there had been a mistake. That I wasn't senile, wasn't dying, and sure as hell hadn't agreed to be warehoused. She looked at me like I was a ghost asking to be resurrected. Mr. Mayfield, your daughter was very clear about your condition. She said you'd been having confusion spells, leaving the stove on, forgetting to take your medications. She showed us medical documentation. Medical documentation I'd never seen. She told us to expect resistance, Mrs. Patterson continued. That you might not remember agreeing to the placement due to your difficulties. My difficulties. I wanted to laugh. The only difficulty I had was trusting a daughter who'd learned to lie as easily as breathing. I'd like to see those medical records, I said. I'm sorry, but only your medical power of attorney can authorize that. Your daughter has requested that all communication go through her. Of course she had. I spent the next 3 days playing their game. I was polite to the nurses, participated in their ridiculous activities, and pretended to take the medications they brought me. Meanwhile, I was watching, listening, and remembering everything I'd taught Jessica about thinking 10 steps ahead. She'd made one crucial mistake. She was so eager to erase me that she'd forgotten I still had friends. Still had resources. Still had enough fight left to burn her entire world down. On day 4, I finally got access to a phone during recreational time. I had 15 minutes before the next resident needed to call their family. I dialed the one number I knew by heart, Robert Kane, my lawyer for the past 20 years. Bob, this is Frank Mayfield. I need you to listen very carefully because I don't have much time. Robert had handled my wife's estate, my business insurance claims, and my will. He knew I was sharper than most men half my age. When I explained where I was calling from and why, the silence on his end spoke volumes. Frank, are you telling me Jessica had you committed against your will? I'm telling you my daughter forged documents, lied to medical professionals, and is currently living in my house while I'm locked up like a criminal. And Bob? I want her to pay for every single second of this. I'll be there Friday. That night, I asked the nurse for a pen and notebook. Told her I liked to journal. Carol smiled and brought me a spiral notebook from the activities closet, probably thinking I'd write about my feelings or some therapeutic nonsense. Instead, I documented everything. Bank account numbers I'd memorized. Property deeds. Insurance policies. Investment accounts Jessica thought I'd forgotten about. Contact information for every person who could testify to my mental competence. I wrote it all down like I was preparing for war. Because I was. They thought I was some confused old man who'd shuffle quietly into the sunset. They had no idea they'd just awakened something that had been sleeping for too long. I'd survived Korea, built a construction business from nothing, and raised a child as a single father after my wife died. If Jessica wanted to play hardball, she'd picked the wrong old man to fuck with. Robert Kane arrived that Friday like an avenging angel in a 3-piece suit. He drove 3 hours through a spring rainstorm, marched through Sunset Manor's front doors, and announced to every staff member within earshot that he was my attorney and someone was about to get sued into the Stone Age. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Suddenly Mrs. Patterson was very interested in reviewing my case. Suddenly the nurses were asking if I needed anything. Suddenly everyone wanted to make sure I was comfortable during this difficult transition. Robert came into my room with a briefcase and fire in his eyes. "Frank, we're getting you out of here today. And then we're going to destroy them." For the first time in a week, I smiled. We spent the next 4 hours going over everything. The forged power of attorney documents. The medical records that didn't exist. The property deed that still listed only my name. The joint bank account Jessica thought she could access freely, not knowing I'd been tracking every withdrawal from my smartphone. "She's been moving money for months," I told Robert, showing him screenshots I'd saved. "Small amounts at first, then bigger chunks. She paid off their credit cards, bought Mark a new truck, even put a down payment on some investment property in her name only." Robert's jaw tightened. "That's elder financial abuse. A felony in this state. It gets better. Check the date on this power of attorney." I handed him the forged document. "It's dated 3 days after my supposed medical emergency. But look at this." I showed him bank records on my phone. She was already using my accounts 2 weeks before I ever set foot in that garage. Premeditated fraud. Robert was already making notes. "Frank, when we're done with her, she'll be lucky if she keeps the clothes on her back." We filed an emergency motion that afternoon to revoke all fraudulent legal documents and freeze every account Jessica had accessed. We submitted a mental competency evaluation from Sunset Manor's own doctor. Dr. Williams had told me privately he'd found no signs of dementia or cognitive decline in any of his assessments. But the real nuclear option was the criminal complaint. Elder abuse. Fraud. Forgery. Identity theft. Each charge carried serious jail time, and Robert made sure the DA's office understood this wasn't some family dispute. This was organized theft by someone who'd systematically planned to rob an elderly man of everything he owned. I left Sunset Manor on Wednesday afternoon with my head high and vengeance in my heart. No tearful goodbyes, no forwarding address. Just a bag of clothes Robert had bought me and a slow, deliberate walk out those sliding doors. Freedom had never tasted so sweet. We didn't go back to my house. I wasn't ready to see what Jessica and Mark had done to 40 years of my life. Instead, Robert booked us adjoining suites at the Hampton Inn downtown while we planned the next phase. Jessica didn't know I was out yet. She was probably sitting in my leather recliner, drinking wine she couldn't afford, telling Mark how easy it had been to get rid of the old man. How they'd finally gotten their inheritance early. She was about to learn that corpses don't usually come back to collect their debts. That weekend, while Jessica and Mark were probably celebrating their good fortune, Robert filed a petition action to force the sale of my property. Since they were living in a house they had no legal right to occupy, and I had never given consent for their residency, the court could order immediate eviction followed by a public sale. But here's where it got beautiful. Since the property was still solely in my name, and all of Jessica's legal authority had been based on forged documents, every penny from the sale would come directly to me. They'd improved my house, maintained my yard, and paid my utilities for months, all while I prepared to sell it out from under them. The process moved faster than even Robert expected. When you have clear evidence of fraud and a victim who's obviously competent, judges tend to take elder abuse cases very seriously. We served them the papers at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. According to Robert's process server, Jessica answered the door in her bathrobe and immediately started screaming. Mark appeared behind her, read the legal documents, turned white as a sheet, and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. My phone rang 20 minutes later. "Dad." Jessica's voice was different now, smaller, shakier, with none of the condescending sweetness she'd used to manipulate me. "We got something in the mail. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake." I let the silence stretch until she spoke again. "You can't be serious. You're going to kick us out of our home?" "My home," I corrected. "The one you stole while putting me in a cage." "Dad, please. We can work this out. We were just trying to help." "Help?" I almost laughed. "You forged my signature. You lied to doctors. You froze my bank accounts and left me with strangers who thought I was losing my mind. You didn't help me, Jessica. You erased me. We can fix this. We can. You have 30 days to get out. After that, the sheriff will remove you. I hung up before she could respond, and for the first time in months, I slept like a baby. The next morning, Robert and I met with a real estate agent named Karen Walsh who specialized in quick sales. I was upfront about the situation. The current occupants were being evicted, there might be some drama, but the house was solid and priced to move. How quickly do you need this sold? Karen asked. Yesterday, I replied. I want them out and I want it done before they have time to damage anything out of spite. Karen nodded. She'd clearly handled messy divorces and family disputes before. I have a young couple who've been looking in this neighborhood for months. First-time buyers, pre-approved for cash, and they need to close quickly because their lease is up. Want to meet them today? David and Sarah Martinez were both teachers in their late 20s, married 2 years, looking for their first real home. They had the earnest enthusiasm of people who'd been saving every penny for their future, and when they walked through my house, their faces lit up like children on Christmas morning. The kitchen is perfect, Sarah said, running her hands along the countertops I'd installed myself 15 years ago. And this backyard, David, can you imagine our kids playing here someday? David was already measuring the garage for his workshop, asking about the electrical setup, admiring the craftsmanship in the crown molding I'd spent weeks perfecting. These were people who would love the house the way I had, who would fill it with laughter instead of lies. There's just one thing you should know, I told them. The current occupants are being evicted. This might get ugly before it gets better. David and Sarah exchanged glances. Are they family? Sarah asked gently. They were, I said. Now they're just people who made some very bad choices. They offered full asking price that afternoon. Cash deal, 2-week closing, no inspection needed. Robert rushed the paperwork through the courts, and suddenly Jessica and Mark had exactly 14 days to pack up their lives and disappear. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt the deep satisfaction of a man who'd been knocked down and had gotten back up swinging. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. While Jessica and Mark scrambled to find somewhere to live, I was house hunting in the same neighborhood. Robert thought I was crazy. Frank, you could buy a nice condo downtown. Maybe a place in Florida. Why stay so close to all this drama? Because, I said, I want front row seats to the rest of this show. I found exactly what I was looking for 3 houses down from my old place, a modest ranch house with good bones and a front porch that faced directly toward where Jessica and Mark would land next. The elderly owner, Mrs. Chen, was moving to assisted living and needed a quick cash sale. Perfect. I paid asking price, no negotiations, and closed escrow the same day Jessica and Mark got evicted from my house. While they loaded a U-Haul with their belongings and their shattered dreams, I was signing papers to become their new neighbor. The beauty of small towns is that everyone knows everyone's business. By the time Jessica and Mark found a rental house 4 blocks away, the only place desperate enough to accept tenants with recent eviction notices, word had already spread about Frank Mayfield's spectacular return from the dead. I spent my first week in the new house setting up my front porch exactly right. Comfortable chair with a clear view of the street. Side table for my coffee and newspaper. American flag hanging from the pole I installed myself. I looked like every other retired grandfather in America, except I was conducting psychological warfare. Every morning at 7 a.m., I was on that porch with my coffee and paper. Every evening at 6 p.m., I was there again, watering my plants or just watching the world go by. I waved at the mailman, chatted with neighbors, and generally made myself the most visible person on the block. Jessica had to drive past my house to get anywhere, work, grocery store, Tommy's school. Every single trip became a reminder that the old man she tried to bury was alive, well, and living his best life. I planted roses along my fence. Bright red ones that bloomed like fire and could be seen from 3 blocks away. I hung wind chimes that sang in the breeze. I installed motion sensor lights that illuminated my entire front yard whenever anyone walked by. Robert called it petty. I called it therapeutic. You know, this is technically harassment, he warned during one of our weekly dinners. What's harassment about an old man enjoying his retirement? I asked innocently. I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just living my life in plain sight. 3 weeks into my residency, Jessica finally cracked. I was reading the morning paper when Jessica's car pulled into my driveway. She sat there for a full 5 minutes before getting out, probably working up the courage for whatever speech she'd rehearsed. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes, hair that hadn't seen a brush in days, clothes that suggested she was sleeping about as well as I'd been in that nursing home. Good. Dad, she said, standing at the bottom of my porch steps like a supplicant approaching a throne. We need to talk. I folded my newspaper carefully and looked at her. Really looked. This was the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike, whose hand I'd held during her mother's funeral, who used to call me her hero. Now she was just another stranger who tried to steal my life. Talk about what? I asked. About this. She gestured around my porch, my house, my obvious contentment. About what you're doing to our family. Our family? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jessica, you put me in a nursing home and stole my house. You forged my signature and lied to everyone who'd listen about my mental state. You took my money, my dignity, and my freedom. What exactly do you think we still have to discuss? She started crying then, not the manipulative tears she'd used as a child to get out of trouble, but the deep, ugly sobs of someone whose world was falling apart. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I know we messed up, she said between gasps. But Mark said it was the right thing to do. He said you'd be safer, happier. He said we were protecting you. From what? From being alone. From falling and not being able to get up. From forgetting to take your medicine or pay your bills. From being a target for scammers who prey on old people. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking like old hinges, and walked to the edge of my porch. Jessica, I've been managing my own life for 73 years. I built a business, raised you, and took care of your mother through 2 years of cancer without anyone's help. What exactly made you think I'd suddenly forgotten how to function? She had no answer for that. You want to know the truth? I continued. You didn't put me away to protect me. You did it because I was inconvenient. Because taking care of an aging parent would have interfered with your comfortable life. Because it was easier to warehouse me than to actually be my daughter. That's not true. Then why didn't you visit? In 8 days at that place, 8 days when I was supposedly confused and scared and needing my family, why didn't you come see me even once? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I thought. She started, then stopped. Mark said it would be better to let you adjust first. Mark said. Everything came back to what Mark said, what Mark thought, what Mark wanted. My daughter had stopped thinking for herself years ago, and now she was paying the price for trusting a man who saw her father as nothing more than an obstacle to easy money. Where is Mark now? I asked. He left. The words came out in a whisper. 2 weeks ago. Said he couldn't handle the stress anymore. Said this was all my fault for not handling you better. Of course he did. Cowards always run when their schemes collapse. Jessica looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I lost everything, Dad. My marriage, my home, my credit. Mark cleaned out our joint account before he left. I'm working double shifts just to pay rent on that terrible little house. Tommy barely speaks to me. And you're sitting here like none of it matters. It doesn't, I said simply. Your problem stopped being my concern the day you signed those papers. She flinched like I'd slapped her. But there is one thing I want you to understand, I continued. Every morning when you drive past this house, I want you to remember something. I didn't choose this war, Jessica. You brought it to my door when you decided I was disposable. Everything that's happened since then, every consequence, every loss, every sleepless night, that's on you. She turned and walked back to her car without another word. I watched her drive away, then sat back down and finished reading my paper. The stock market was up, the weather looked good for the rest of the week, and somewhere in town, my grandson was probably wondering why his family had exploded. That afternoon, Tommy knocked on my door. Tommy had always been my favorite person in the family, though I'd never told anyone that. He had his grandmother's eyes and his grandfather's stubborn streak, plus an honest heart that somehow survived growing up with Jessica and Mark as parents. "Grandpa," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" He was 17 now, tall and lanky like I'd been at his age, with calloused hands that suggested he'd inherited the family work ethic. I'd taught him to use tools, change oil, and think for himself. Now I was about to find out how well those lessons had stuck. "Come on in, son." We sat in my living room, simple furniture, everything clean and organized, nothing like the cluttered chaos Jessica preferred. Tommy looked around like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "Mom told me you had dementia," he said. "Said you were getting confused, leaving the stove on, forgetting things. But you seem fine to me." "I am fine. Always have been." "Then why did she?" "You tell me. You lived in that house. What did you see?" Tommy was quiet for a long time, thinking. I'd always respected his need to process things carefully rather than react emotionally like his mother. "I saw them whispering a lot," he finally said. "Mark was always talking about money, about how expensive everything was getting. He said college was going to bankrupt them, that they needed to start thinking long-term. And Mom, she seemed scared all the time. Scared of getting old herself, scared of ending up like her friends whose parents were in nursing homes." Smart boy. He'd seen what I'd missed, that this wasn't just about greed, it was about fear. Fear of responsibility, fear of the future, fear of having to make real sacrifices for family. "She also said you were leaving everything to some charity," Tommy continued. "That you'd changed your will and we wouldn't inherit anything anyway." I almost laughed. "Did she show you this new will?" "She said Mark saw it when he was helping you organize your papers." "Tommy, I haven't changed my will in 15 years. And the only person who's been through my papers recently was your mother, when she was forging my signature on bank documents." His face went pale. "She really did it? All of it? Every bit? Forge my name, lie to doctors, steal my money, and dump me in that place like I was already dead. Then she moved into my house and started spending my savings on her credit card bills." Tommy put his head in his hands. "Jesus. I had no idea it was that bad. Your mother made choices, son. Bad ones. But those were her choices, not yours. The question now is what you want to do about it." He looked up at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're 17 years old, almost a man, and you're about to inherit a pretty spectacular mess. Your parents' marriage is over, your mother's broke, and your father skipped town rather than face the consequences of his actions. You can either let that define your future, or you can choose a different path." "What kind of path?" I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a folder I'd been preparing for this conversation. "The kind where you finish high school, go to college, and build something better than what your parents managed. The kind where you learn from their mistakes instead of repeating them." I handed him the folder. Inside was information about college scholarships, trade school programs, and a bank account I'd opened in his name with enough money to fund his education and get him started in life. "Grandpa, I can't take this." "You're not taking it. You're earning it. Work hard, make good choices, and treat people with respect. In return, you get the future your parents tried to steal from both of us." Tommy started crying then, not the bitter tears his mother had shed on my porch, but the overwhelmed gratitude of someone who'd just been thrown a lifeline. What about Mom? She's falling apart. She can barely pay rent. Your mother is 45 years old, I said. She made her bed when she decided to trust a con man over her own father. She'll figure out how to sleep in it, or she won't. Either way, that's not your responsibility. But she's still my mom. Yes, she is. And if she gets her act together, apologizes for what she's done, and proves she's learned from this disaster, maybe there's hope for your relationship. But Tommy, you cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved. And you cannot sacrifice your future to fix someone else's mistakes. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. In the meantime, I continued, you're welcome here anytime. Your grandmother's old sewing room is set up as a guest bedroom. You can stay overnight, on weekends, whenever you need space to think or study or just get away from the drama. Thanks, Grandpa. For everything. Don't thank me yet. Thank me in 10 years when you're successful and happy and everything your parents should have been. That night, Tommy stayed for dinner. We grilled burgers on my back patio and talked about his plans for senior year, his college applications, and his dreams of becoming an engineer like his grandfather had been. For the first time in months, I felt like I was investing in something worthwhile instead of just tearing down the people who'd betrayed me. When he left that evening, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding what Jessica and Mark had tried to destroy, not just my life, but the idea that family meant something more than convenience and greed. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when the story involves family drama and criminal charges. Within a month, everyone in our community knew the basic facts. Frank Mayfield's daughter had tried to put him away and steal his house, but the old man had fought back and won. The reactions varied depending on who you asked. The older folks, people who'd built businesses alongside me, who'd attended Margaret's funeral, who remembered when Jessica was a sweet little girl, were horrified. They started inviting me to church dinners, community events, and neighborhood gatherings. Suddenly I was the guest of honor everywhere, the brave elder who'd stood up for himself when his own family abandoned him. The younger crowd, Jessica's former friends, Mark's drinking buddies, people who'd envied their comfortable lifestyle, were having a different conversation. They were wondering how many of their own aging parents might be targets for similar schemes. How many families were one financial crisis away from deciding that warehousing Grandpa was easier than caring for him. My story became a cautionary tale that spread beyond our little town. Robert told me he'd gotten calls from adult children wanting to review their elderly parents' legal arrangements and from seniors wanting to protect themselves from family financial abuse. I'd accidentally started a conversation about something nobody wanted to discuss, the uncomfortable reality that elder abuse usually comes from inside the family. But the most interesting reaction came from Jessica herself. 2 months after our confrontation on my porch, I noticed changes in her routine. She was leaving earlier for work, coming home later, and her car was often gone on weekends. At first, I assumed she was avoiding the sight of my house, but Tommy filled in the details during one of our weekly dinners. She's been volunteering, he said. At the nursing home across town. Started about 6 weeks ago. I nearly choked on my coffee. Doing what? Helping with activities, reading to residents, organizing their mail. She said she needed to understand what she'd put you through. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. Part of me wondered if this was just another manipulation, a way to look sympathetic before her court date. But mostly, I was curious. Was Jessica actually capable of genuine remorse, or was this just damage control? I got my answer a few days later when Mrs. Patterson from Sunset Manor called me. Mr. Mayfield, I hope you don't mind the contact, but I wanted you to know that your daughter has been volunteering here. She specifically asked to work with residents who don't get regular family visits. I see. She's been very helpful, very dedicated. But yesterday she asked if she could speak with some of our long-term residents about how they felt when their families placed them here. She said she needed to understand their perspective for personal reasons. And what did they tell her? Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Nothing you probably want to hear, Mr. Mayfield. But I think it was important for her to hear it. That evening, I sat on my porch thinking about second chances and whether some betrayals were too deep to forgive. I'd built my entire adult life around the belief that family was sacred, that the bonds between parent and child were unbreakable. Jessica had shattered that belief in the space of a single week. But she was still my daughter. And if she was genuinely trying to understand the magnitude of what she'd done, maybe there was hope for something better than the Cold War we'd been fighting. Or maybe I was just an old fool who wanted to believe his little girl was still worth saving. Jessica's criminal trial was scheduled for November, 8 months after my escape from Sunset Manor. Robert had built an airtight case, forged documents, fraudulent bank transfers, false medical claims, and elder abuse charges that could send her to prison for up to 10 years. She could plead out, Robert told me during one of our strategy sessions. Restitution, probation, community service. She'd avoid jail time but would have a felony record. What's the alternative? We go to trial, present everything, and let a jury decide. Given the evidence, she's looking at significant prison time. I thought about Tommy, about Jessica's volunteer work at the nursing home, about the possibility that she might actually be learning from this disaster. Set up a meeting, I said. Just her and me. No lawyers, no mediators. I want to hear what she has to say for herself. Robert looked concerned. Frank, anything you discuss could affect the criminal case. Then we'll discuss other things. We met at a coffee shop downtown on a Thursday afternoon. Jessica looked different, thinner, older, but somehow more present than she'd been in years. The desperate panic I'd seen on my porch had been replaced by something steadier. Sadness, maybe. Or acceptance. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said. Thank your son. He thinks you deserve a chance to explain yourself. She nodded. He's a good kid. Better than I deserved. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes, two people who'd shared a lifetime but no longer knew how to talk to each other. I've been visiting the nursing home where you were, she finally said. Talking to the residents, trying to understand what I put you through. And what did you learn? That I was a coward. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. I convinced myself I was protecting you, but I was really just protecting myself from having to face your mortality. From having to admit that you were getting older and might need help someday. I never asked for help. I know. That was part of the problem. You were so independent, so capable, that when you had that dizzy spell, I panicked. Mark kept saying we needed to act before something worse happened, before you fell downstairs or crashed your car or forgot to turn off the stove. None of which ever happened. No. But I was terrified they might. And instead of talking to you about my fears, instead of asking what kind of help you might actually want, I let Mark convince me that preemptive action was the only responsible choice. She paused, looking down at her hands. The residents at the nursing home told me things I didn't want to hear. About feeling abandoned. About losing their sense of purpose and dignity. About lying awake at night wondering if their families would ever come back. Good, I said. You should hear those things. Mrs. Rodriguez in room 314 hasn't had a visitor in 3 years. Her son lives 20 minutes away but says he's too busy. Mr. Garrett's daughter put him there after his wife died, sold his house, and spent his savings on a vacation to Europe. They all have stories like yours, Dad. Stories about children who found it easier to warehouse their parents than to actually care for them. I waited for her to continue. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, she said. I know I can't undo what I did to you. But I need you to know that I understand now. What I took from you wasn't just money or property, it was your dignity. Your right to control your own life. And that's unforgivable. Yes, I said. It is. She flinched but didn't look away. The prosecutor wants me to take a plea deal. 5 years probation, restitution, and community service. Robert says if I go to trial, I could get 10 years in prison. What do you want me to say? That I'll ask the DA to go easy on you? No. I want you to do whatever feels right for you. If you think I deserve prison, then I'll accept that. If you think there's another way, I'm open to hearing it. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the fake remorse I'd seen so many times before. But all I saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine regret. What happened to Mark? I asked. He moved to Arizona. Filed for divorce last month. Apparently, being married to a felon wasn't part of his life plan. Her voice held no bitterness, just tired acceptance. He cleaned out our joint account before he left, money that was technically mine but probably came from your accounts originally. So in a way, he stole from both of us. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with him being gone. I should have left him years ago, but I was too scared to admit I'd made a mistake. Too proud to come to you for help when things got bad financially. I would have helped. I know. That's what makes this so much worse. We sat quietly for a while, watching other customers come and go. Normal families having normal conversations about normal problems. I envied them their simple complications. There is one thing I want from you, I finally said. What? I want you to keep volunteering at that nursing home. Not as part of any legal requirement, but because you need to remember what you almost did to me. And I want you to help other families avoid making the same mistakes we made. I can do that. And I want you to be a better mother to Tommy than you were a daughter to me. He's got a chance to break this cycle, but only if you stop trying to control his future and start supporting his choices. He's staying with you most weekends now. Because he needs space to figure out who he wants to be. Don't take that personally. Take it as an opportunity to work on yourself. She nodded. What about us? Is there any chance we can fix this? I considered the question seriously. Jessica, trust isn't like a broken bone that heals stronger than before. It's like a cracked foundation, you can repair it, but it's never quite the same. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you again without remembering what you're capable of. Tears started sliding down her cheeks. I understand. But, I continued, I'm willing to see what happens if you prove you've actually changed. Not with words, but with years of consistent actions. Maybe someday we can have some kind of relationship again. Maybe not. Either way, you need to build a life that doesn't depend on my forgiveness. I'm trying. Then keep trying. I called Robert that evening and told him I wanted Jessica to take the plea deal. Prison wouldn't teach her anything she wasn't already learning, and Tommy didn't need the additional trauma of watching his mother get locked up. The plea hearing was scheduled for December. Jessica would pay full restitution, every penny she'd taken, plus interest and legal fees. She'd served 200 hours of community service at various elder care facilities. She'd be on probation for 5 years, during which any similar offense would trigger the original 10-year prison sentence. Most importantly, she'd have a permanent criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. Every job application, every rental agreement, every background check would remind her of what she'd done. It wasn't the biblical revenge I'd fantasized about during those early days at Sunset Manor, but it was justice. And sometimes justice is more satisfying than revenge because it comes with the possibility of redemption. The day after the plea hearing, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove past Jessica's rental house. It was a small, shabby place with peeling paint and a yard full of weeds. Her car was in the driveway, an old Honda with a dented bumper that had seen better decades. This was her life now. Working double shifts at a retail job, living paycheck to paycheck, driving a car that barely ran, all because she'd been too proud and too scared to have an honest conversation with her father about growing old. I didn't feel satisfaction looking at her reduced circumstances. I felt something closer to pity. That evening, Tommy came over for dinner. We'd fallen into a comfortable routine. He'd stay with me on weekends, help with yard work and household projects, and we'd talk about his future plans. He'd been accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship, and I'd promised to cover the rest. "Mom's been asking about you," he said while we cleaned up the dishes. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you seem happy. Whether you're taking care of yourself. Whether you ever mention her. What do you tell her? That you're doing fine. That you seem content with your life. That you don't really talk about the past much anymore." Smart kid. He was learning to navigate the complex dynamics of a fractured family without taking sides or carrying messages. "She wants to apologize to you again," he continued. "In person. She says she has things to give back to you." "What kind of things?" "Pictures, mostly. Photo albums from when I was little, some stuff that belonged to Grandma. She said she took them when she moved into your house but knows they should stay with you." I thought about the family photos that had disappeared from my walls, the wedding pictures of Margaret and me that I'd assumed were lost forever. "Tell her she can bring them by next Saturday afternoon." "But Tommy, I want you to be there too." "Why?" "Because this family has had enough secrets and manipulation. If we're going to try to move forward, everything needs to happen in the open." Jessica arrived at my house the following Saturday carrying a large cardboard box and wearing the nervous expression of someone approaching a judge for sentencing. Tommy had gotten there early, and we'd spent the morning working in my garden, giving him something to do with his hands while we waited. "Hi, Dad," she said, setting the box down on my porch steps. "Jessica." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, 3 generations of Mayfields who'd forgotten how to be a family. "I brought back the things I shouldn't have taken," she said, opening the box. Inside were dozens of photo albums, framed pictures, my wife's jewelry, and various mementos from 40 years of marriage. Things I'd searched for after getting out of Sunset Manor, assuming they'd been lost forever. "I didn't sell any of it," she said quickly. "I know you probably think I would have, but I couldn't. They were too important." I picked up a framed photo of Margaret holding baby Jessica at the hospital. Margaret looked exhausted but radiant, the way new mothers do when they're holding their first miracle. Jessica looked like any other newborn, wrinkled, red-faced, and completely unaware that she'd just changed her parents' entire world. "Your mother was so proud of you," I said, not looking up from the picture. "She used to say you were going to change the world someday." "I disappointed her." "You disappointed yourself. She's been gone 12 years, Jessica. She can't be disappointed anymore." Tommy helped me carry the box inside while Jessica waited on the porch, uncertain whether she'd been invited in. I made the decision for her. "Come in. We need to talk about boundaries." We sat in my living room, the same furniture I'd had for 20 years, arranged exactly the way Margaret and I had liked it. Jessica looked around like she was seeing it for the first time, probably remembering all the Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings that had happened in this space. "I want to establish some ground rules," I said. "For how this is going to work going forward." "Okay. First, you're welcome to visit, but you call first. Always. I won't have you showing up unannounced." "I understand." "Second, we don't discuss the past unless I bring it up. I don't want to hear apologies or explanations or excuses. What's done is done." "All right." Third, your relationship with Tommy is separate from whatever relationship you and I might have. You don't use him to send me messages, and you don't put him in the middle of adult conversations. I won't. Fourth, if you ever lie to me again about anything, even something small, we're done permanently. I've forgiven a lot of things in my life, Jessica, but I'm too old to forgive the same betrayal twice. She nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. And finally, I continued, you need to understand that earning back my trust is going to take years, not months. There will be times when I'm cold to you, times when I don't want to see you, times when I remember what you did and get angry all over again. If you can't handle that uncertainty, then we should just part ways now." "I can handle it," she said. I want to try. Why? The question seemed to surprise her. Because you're my father. Because I love you. Because I want Tommy to grow up knowing what family is supposed to look like instead of what we became. I looked at Tommy, who was watching this conversation with the careful attention of someone trying to memorize every word. What do you think, son? Is it worth the risk? Tommy was quiet for a long time, considering. I think Grandma would want us to try, he finally said. She used to tell me that families are like gardens. Sometimes you have to pull up the weeds and replant, but you don't abandon the whole patch just because part of it went bad. Smart boy. And wise beyond his years. All right, I said. We'll try. But Jessica, you understand this is probation, not forgiveness. You're going to have to earn your way back into this family one day at a time. I understand. Good. Now help me put these pictures back where they belong. 1 year later, I was sitting on my front porch reading the morning paper when a familiar car pulled into my driveway. But this time, it wasn't Jessica coming to grovel or Tommy coming for advice. It was David and Sarah Martinez, the young couple who'd bought my old house. Mr. Mayfield. Sarah called out, waving from their car window. Do you have a minute? They looked different than when I'd first met them, more confident, more settled, like people who'd grown into their lives instead of just surviving them. What can I do for you folks? We wanted to show you something, David said, grinning like a kid with a secret. Sarah was holding a bundle of blankets, and when she pulled back the corner, I saw a tiny face peering out with unfocused eyes and that serious expression all newborns seem to have. This is Emma, Sarah said. She's 2 weeks old. We wanted you to meet the first baby to come home to your house in 30 years. I felt something crack open in my chest, not pain this time, but something warmer. Joy, maybe. Or hope. She's beautiful, I said, and meant it. We have a favor to ask, David continued. Sarah's parents live in California, and mine are in Ohio. We don't have any family nearby, and we were wondering, would you consider being Emma's honorary grandfather? I looked at this young couple who'd taken such good care of the house I'd built, who'd filled it with love instead of lies, who were offering me something I'd thought I'd lost forever, the chance to be part of a real family. I'd be honored, I said. Over the following months, I became a regular fixture in Emma's life. I babysat when David and Sarah needed date nights. I taught them how to fix the temperamental garbage disposal and maintain the old boiler system. I shared stories about the house's history and helped them plan improvements that would honor its character while meeting their needs. Jessica noticed, of course. She'd started visiting regularly, always calling first, always respectful of my boundaries, slowly earning back small pieces of trust through consistent actions. She'd see Sarah pushing Emma in a stroller past my house and would ask Tommy about Dad's new family. Are you jealous? Tommy asked me one evening. Of what? That he's doing grandpa stuff with someone else's baby instead of waiting for me to give him grandchildren. I laughed. Son, I've learned that love isn't a finite resource. Having more people to care about doesn't diminish what I feel for you. If anything, it reminds me how much family really matters. What about Mom? Do you think you'll ever really forgive her? It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with for months. I think forgiveness is different than trust, I said finally. I can forgive your mother for making terrible choices out of fear and weakness. But trusting her again, that's something she has to earn through years of different choices. Do you think she will? I think she's trying. Whether she succeeds or not isn't up to me. That summer, Jessica surprised everyone by announcing she'd been accepted to a social work program at the community college. She wanted to specialize in elder advocacy, helping families navigate the challenges of aging parents without resorting to the kind of drastic measures she'd tried with me. It's a 4-year program, she told me during one of our monthly dinners. I'll be working and going to school at the same time, so it'll take longer. But I want to turn what I did to you into something that helps other people. That's a good goal, I said. I also wanted you to know that I've been seeing a therapist. Working on understanding why I let Mark manipulate me, why I was so afraid of aging and mortality that I made the choices I did. And what have you learned? That I was trying to control things that can't be controlled. That I was so afraid of losing you that I ended up throwing you away. That I need to learn the difference between helping someone and trying to save them from their own life. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. 2 years after my escape from Sunset Manor, I did something I'd never thought I'd do again. I invited Jessica to Thanksgiving dinner at my house. Not just her, but Tommy, and David and Sarah and baby Emma, who was now walking and getting into everything. We sat around the dining room table Margaret and I had bought as newlyweds, eating turkey I'd cooked in the oven I'd installed myself, sharing stories and laughter and the comfortable chaos of people who'd chosen to be a family despite their complicated history. Jessica was different now, quieter, more thoughtful, quick to listen and slow to speak. She helped with dishes without being asked, played with Emma without trying to take over, and treated me with the careful respect of someone who understood how fragile rebuilt trust could be. During a quiet moment while the others were in the living room watching football, she approached me in the kitchen. "Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I need to say something." "What?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For fighting back. For not just accepting what I did to you. For making me face the consequences of my choices. I know it would have been easier to just write me off completely, but you gave me the chance to become someone better." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. She looked like the little girl who used to help me in my workshop, asking endless questions and hanging on every word. Curious instead of desperate. Open instead of calculating. "You're welcome," I said. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the last of the dishes, I realized something had shifted. The anger that had sustained me through those early months of revenge and legal battles had faded into something gentler. Not forgetting, I'd never forget what Jessica had done, but acceptance that people were capable of both terrible mistakes and genuine redemption. I thought about Margaret, about what she would have made of this whole mess. She'd always been better at forgiveness than I was, quicker to see the best in people even when they showed her their worst. I think she would have been proud that our family had found its way back to something resembling love, even if it looked different than what we'd started with. 3 years later, I'm still living in my little house with the perfect view of the neighborhood. My roses bloom brighter every spring. My front porch gets morning sun and evening shade. My garden produces enough tomatoes to share with all my neighbors. Tommy graduated high school as valedictorian and started college with a full scholarship and a clear sense of his own worth. He visits every weekend, bringing laundry and stories about his engineering classes and the girl he's been dating who shares his love of building things that last. Jessica finished her social work degree and now runs an elder advocacy program for the county. She's helped dozens of families navigate the challenges of aging parents without resorting to the nuclear options she once thought were necessary. She's never remarried, says she's too busy learning to like herself again to worry about finding someone else to complete her. David and Sarah added a son to their family, little Michael, who calls me Pop Pop and brings me dandelions from the yard I once maintained myself. Emma, now 4, has decided I'm her best friend and comes to my house every week to help me bake cookies and work in the garden. The house where Jessica and Mark briefly lived before their eviction has changed hands twice. The current owners are an elderly couple who nod politely when I wave but keep to themselves. They have no idea they're living in the shadow of one of the neighborhood's greatest family dramas. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how hard I fought back, whether I might have handled things differently with the wisdom of hindsight. The answer is always no. Jessica needed to learn that actions have consequences, that elderly people aren't disposable, that trust once broken requires years of consistent effort to rebuild. But mostly, I learned something about myself during those dark months. I learned that even at 76 years old, I still had fight left in me. That I didn't have to accept other people's definitions of my worth or capability. That the quietest person in the room might just be waiting for the right moment to remind everyone who they're dealing with. I keep the notebook from Sunset Manor in my desk drawer, not as a reminder of revenge, but as evidence of resilience. Sometimes late at night, I'll read through those desperate plans I made in that sterile room, and I'll remember what it felt like to be discarded by the people I loved most. Then I'll walk out to my front porch, sit in my comfortable chair, and look out at a neighborhood where everyone knows Frank Mayfield is not to be underestimated. Where families wave when they drive by. Where children stop to pet my old dog and ask about my garden. Where I built something better from the ashes of what was taken from me. They thought they were burying me when they left me in that nursing home. They didn't know they were planting a seed that would grow into something stronger, more determined, and infinitely more dangerous than the trusting father they betrayed. Some stories end with forgiveness. Some end with revenge. This one ended with justice, redemption, and the hard-won knowledge that it's never too late to fight for the life you deserve. The view from my porch never looked better.